Thank you, everyone. I will say, Robin and I have been giving these talks and doing it in this manner where we each come separately and then come together. We've been doing this together for, wow, almost 2 years now, but very regularly for over a year. And recently, although we've been friends for a very long time, recently got to be together in person at PLA, where we did this as a part of a pre-conference, but also went and did some learning from others on these topics. And both of us have been very energized by what we learned and ready at making some changes, but still keeping the crux of everything that we are talking to you about. So this is my part. If you notice, when Robin went, she focused on collection development. My job is to focus on the active portion for readers advisory. So I'm going to give you a little bit of reminders. I know Robin began with this concept of not racist versus anti-racist. And then I'm going to take you a little bit further with 3 more things that you have to understand before you get to an understanding of where we are and how you can act. So first of all, libraries are not neutral. This is a hard thing. Well, all 3 of these edicts I'm going to go over as a profession we have a very hard time with. Robin and I don't, but some of you do. And we're going to help you through that depending on where you come at us from. I realize everyone's from a different place, but I want to start with libraries are not neutral. And I really changed how I talk about this. I used to let other people describe it, and I'm not doing that anymore. I want to explain to you, first of all, I have a great tweet from a librarian at Harvard where he talks about library neutrality as an impossibility, and we can either empower marginalized users or we can empower the powerful. I think that's really important for people to understand. But I want to remind you, it's more than that. We have never been neutral. I'm very upset with this idea that libraries have to be neutral because I want you to think about it from a reader's advisory perspective. I want you to focus on being actively anti-racist from service to readers, which is one of our main things we do, right? So we have never been neutral. Let's take Robin, for example, collections, her side of the conversation. We have never, ever added every single book that's ever been published to our library collections. Therefore, if we are not across the board adding every single title, regardless of anything else, we are not neutral. We are making choices. We are making choices on what books we add to our collections, professional choices. We are making choices about what books we take out of our collections. Therefore, we have never been neutral. Now, people say, okay, Becky, that's really literal. Don't be so naive. I'm going to say this and I'm going to bring it up multiple times. And I have it here to read it, but I want to remind you, this link goes to the ALA's recently added 9th principle into their code of ethics. And I am going to read it once, but I'm going to be repeating a key line from it multiple times to remind you, and for you to remind your supervisors that think you have to be neutral and even allow space for hate. According to the ALA's Code of Ethics 9th principle, which was passed last June, we affirm the inherent dignity and rights of every person. We work to recognize and dismantle systemic and individual biases, to confront inequity and oppression, to enhance diversity and inclusion, and to advance racial and social justice in our libraries, communities, professions, and associations through awareness, advocacy, education, collaboration, services, which is, the books we offer, and allocation of resources and spaces. Again, all of you have the ALA Code of Ethics somewhere in your policies in your library. So all of you should be adding this 9th principle. This 9th principle says, we work to recognize and dismantle systemic and individual biases because systemic racism is real. And that's the thing here, right? We can no longer hide behind, well, we have to let Nazis into the library because we represent every voice. No, we don't. The ALA Code of Ethics now says we don't. We have that to stand behind. But we also have to understand that, as they say there, that systemic racism is real. And just because systemic racism is real does not make you racist. Everyone is part of systemic racism. People get very upset when we say, especially if you are white, and especially cis white ladies who are basically running librarianship, when you hear that, people say, oh, but I'm not racist. Why are you calling me racist? I'm not calling you racist. You want to understand that systemic racism is real? And I'm going to set it up for you so you understand what I'm trying to do to learn, because I don't want to trust you to go learn it in a vacuum later. You click on it, it's a tweet, it's a video of a woman, a white woman in Georgia with a Southern accent, standing before a school board to make a public comment. Sit right now with your feelings, because I'm going to go right out and tell you. My feelings were, oh no, what racist thing is she going to do? And you are lying to yourself if you didn't think that. Except when you click on it, she gets up there and says, systemic oppression is real. And if white people don't speak out about it and stand up for Black people specifically with our curriculums, nothing is ever going to change. The fact that you feel this, and I know I'm ruining it for you, but I need to for the learning. I did that when I watched it. At that moment, there's been many moments when I've understood systemic racism is real. I have more examples, but when you do that and you click on it and your instinct, and you're lying if that wasn't your instinct, is to cringe and be worried, especially if you're someone coming from a not racist point of view. This is the video for all of you who get upset when I say systemic racism is real, but it's not me. It is you, because that was your instinct. Which leads me to the final thing, and this is the one I'm going to be driving home for the next 50 minutes. You need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Change does not happen till you have felt discomfort. You being all of you, but you specifically. We're going to start with some personal responsibility, and we're going to move on to working with our teams. But it all begins with you, because being anti-racist requires there is action. And to address systemic oppression is uncomfortable in so many ways. It's uncomfortable because we have to come to our terms with our place in it, but it's also uncomfortable because as we're helping others come to terms, they are uncomfortable. And when people are uncomfortable, they don't act as their best selves, but we will get there. I also want to recognize at the start that equity, diversity, and inclusion is about way more than just racism. And I'm going to mention that a little bit at the end, but that's where we're going to start, because this is the place where everybody can reckon with it and move forward. I want to talk very quickly about my journey. My journey is one of listening. I come from a very unique place in the library sphere. First of all, like Robin likes to say, Becky, you look like all of them. And so when you get mad at them, and we do like this good cop, bad cop, as you're going to notice, I'm not going to be as nice as she was. I'll be kind, but I'm going to be strict, right? It's easier for me with my, look to challenge the vast majority of our profession. But I also know, as a marginalized person myself, growing up as a Jewish woman. Now, I grew up in your area. I was in the New York metropolitan area. I grew up in New Jersey. Let me tell you, I learned a lot more moving to Chicago, which I didn't know when I moved here, is a really Catholic town. Literally being greeted in my suburb by the first question is, what parish do you go to? Made me very worried about if I was going to fit in or not. So I experienced some of marginalization. I understand it from that way, okay? Not as much as Robin, as we say, who has to walk in a room and everybody knows that she's Black. And they have reactions to that. But I also have learned, because I've traveled the country giving training and talked to people about incorporating marginalized voices into their collections, even before I gave these talks. I've learned by listening at all the places I've been to, all the people, especially the marginalized library workers who write to me after. I have had some heartbreaking emails after I went and did some of these talks, which made me act and start giving a talk about this and working with Robin, because I would go to her and ask her how I should handle some of this, and I would listen to her. I've learned by being a trustee for 22 years, a locally elected trustee in Cook County, Illinois. And also I'm on my system board for the entire northern half of Illinois. You want to know how serious the system board is? The ALA is part of our system because they're in our region. So it's always fun. On my committees are ALA librarians. So, and I also ran a department for Readers Advisory for 15 years. And so I understand this from a fully 360-degree position. The library I worked with was also majority minority, which I didn't understand at the time because it just was what it was. And we worked with our community, but I've learned a lot by doing that as well. Again, systemic racism is entrenched. I'm going to give you some examples right below. It is not just that people are racist, it's entrenched. This is if you want to learn more about that, this is a great Twitter thread about furniture and how systemic racism is entrenched even in furniture. We call the thing we put our feet up on an ottoman. But here's the thing, we all are part of systemic racism. And this is how I'm going to make you all feel uncomfortable. Let's skip to the third one to save time. Master bedroom. Every single one of you at some time or another has used the term master bedroom. Don't use that term anymore. It refers to the slave master's bedroom. We all have done it. People who are descended from slaves have used the term master bedroom. Just because you don't know that it's harmful doesn't mean it's okay. We're going to talk about how we check ourselves and everything when that happens. But here's how you know change is coming. How does change come? When the establishment starts helping that change. So if you watch HGTV, any show made from 2020 onward, if you go to Redfin or Zillow or the MLS listing services, master bedroom is not there anymore. It's actually jarring when I see an old HGTV show and they say master bedroom. It's primary bedroom. It's owner's suite. It's something else, okay? Crazy is an adjective, is a term I'm trying to get out of my vocabulary. I've done a very good job. Low on the totem pole is something I once said during a presentation and somebody called me out on it. I don't say that anymore. What was I saying it to refer to? Lower down on the organizational chart. So just say that. Don't, take over Native American terms to use them for your explanation. Here are two other terms I used when I thought I was being well-meaning, because we are well-meaning, but systemic racism is entrenched. When I started in libraries, me and my staff, when I started running a readers advisory department, we gave everybody a multicultural requirement. Everyone on our team, they had to make sure they read 6 books a year that were not from the white cis, we didn't say cis then, but white heterosexual Western point of view, right? We had to do that. We had to do our multicultural requirement. And then flash forward a bunch of years later, best-selling author Sonali Dev, who is an Indian American and lives here in Chicago, was talking about, at an event I hired her for, was talking about reading about herself in the New York Times. And they were reviewing her books. And she said this out loud. And I'm sitting there in the audience, so proud that I'm having this talk on, own voices and diversity and all these things. And she looks out in the crowd and she says, and I'm reading the New York Times, and it says, Sonali Dev's multicultural romances, blah, 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 blah. And she stops and she looks at everyone and she says nothing. And she says, my books are not multicultural. They're about Indians in India falling in love. They're only multicultural when you are saying they're not white and Western. Think about that, right? I just opened my eyes and I was like, well, I can never use that term again. That term is not okay. You're othering everyone else who isn't from the perceived created norm, right? Same thing with alternative lifestyles. I worked at a library, the library I worked at, we also had a large gay population with a very active gay rights group. And they helped us buy our stickers for our LGBTQ books and gave us money every year to make sure we're spending at least, they gave us $500 extra for our collection every year. And they helped us pick out the stickers that say alternative lifestyles. Think about that. Not okay. Even people who identify are victims of systemic racism, right? Of course, we don't have those stickers anymore. So one of the things I get all the time is, Becky, what do you do if you make one of these missteps? Because when you start to do this work that I'm going to ask you in these 12 action steps that are coming, when you start to do this, you are going to become someone who people attack. I get attacked all the time. A lot of the people doing it are trying to get me to stop. And you have to understand that, but you also have to set an example on when people misstep, because you will. You apologize. So when I said low on the totem pole, I actually said fell on deaf ears once during this slide. And someone said, Becky, you can't believe you're talking about not being ableist and you did that. And I went, oh my goodness, thank you for pointing it out. I am so sorry. I have a whole bunch of things that I, am trained to say or that have become regular in my vocabulary that are not okay. I am acknowledging that you are correct. I should not do that. That term is not okay, and you don't find it okay. I'm going to work to get it out of my vocabulary. I'm sorry. I will be honest and check myself. So if I do these things in a presentation, I do check myself. One of the things I'm working on now is not gendering groups, not saying you guys. I'm really good at it now. Not perfect, not using crazy as an adjective, which I'm good at like 90% of the time, more like 75 for you guys. But I will check myself during it. Here's the thing you don't do. When someone calls you out, you don't say, well, I had no idea that, and I didn't mean to be mean, and I wasn't trying to be a bad person. No, stop. It's not about you, okay? Let me talk to you about these 12 action steps. There's something here that every single person at every single library can do. And that's the fun thing about this. I also, one of my major themes is to use less inflammatory examples, because I understand that when we're dealing with microaggressions or systemic racism, that people get upset. So I'm going to offer you less inflammatory examples. Starting first up with this mission statement idea. Everybody writes mission statements in libraries, right? This is the company mission statement for RA for All. This is a second draft, a second attempt at one, or second version of one. I wrote this one with Robin, and we use this when I'm hired alone or when we're hired together. Every single person who hires us has to agree to this. It has a lot of things we've said, including libraries are not neutral. I just had a library hire me to do this training, who the bosses say that libraries are neutral. They hired me and I went and gave the talk. And during the chat, when I was talking about libraries not being neutral, they were all like, well, we're being told libraries are neutral. And then they were writing to each other, but Becky said in her training that I almost said you guys, not okay. You all signed this. And so you agreed that libraries are not neutral. What's going on? I just helped that library have a very uncomfortable conversation that they need to have. And I gave them the tools in this presentation to have it. Every single one of you should, after this presentation, at least sit down and write something down, whether it's goals or a mission statement. To start with, I would say every single person should say, I'm going to do my work at my library with an anti-racist lens going forward. And that would be a nice general mission statement. And you can find little goals throughout here, actual objectives maybe that you can use. Now, that leads me to the next one, which goes right into it, to document it, right? You want to craft policies and procedures for all of the action steps. Policies are at the board level. Some of those are harder. I would ask every one of you to go back to your library and ask them to say, hey, because you do this, go check first, but you have the ALA Code of Ethics in our policies. We need to add that 9th principle. That will help us be more actively anti-racist, even if our board is less comfortable with it. And we can have a conversation about adding that. This is not a, can we add it or not? The ALA added it. If you have the ALA Code of Ethics in your board policies, this one must be added. A lot of libraries haven't done it yet because it's been around for less than a year. First step. Procedures, though, are at the staff level. And this is where you can start immediately. Here's an example, less inflammatory examples. Do you have an overall display or merchandising policy at your library? You should. If you don't have a policy that talks about what your guidelines are for displaying books, whether online or in person, this is a great time to talk about that. That wouldn't be a policy at the board level. That would be procedures, right? What I would say is you would have your basic rule of reader's advisory, which is we are displaying merchandising items that people would not find on their own. So for example, you would not put a James Patterson on display ever. He doesn't need your help. I mean, the new books, fine. We're going to talk about new book displays and other merchandising guidelines in a little bit when we get to some problematic titles. But if that's one of your goals, you get around some of the larger issues like the fact that J.K. Rowling is a horrible human being and we don't want to promote her. This is your guidelines. We don't promote books that people can find on their own. You're never going to have to worry about putting out J.K. Rowling books. You shouldn't be anyway, as part of your basic library display guidelines or merchandising guidelines. But you can add to that our goal, a secondary goal, again, based on the ALA Code of Ethics. We work to recognize and dismantle systemic and individual biases, to confront inequity and oppression, and to enhance diversity and inclusion. That's in the ALA Code of Ethics. You can add that to your display guidelines, your merchandising guidelines, and then enhance diversity and inclusion. You can have a written down marginalized voices requirement in every display you do. Our goal is to follow the ALA Code of Ethics and enhance diversity and inclusion. Put that in your guidelines. This will help you do that. Why do you need to do that? You can just say we're going to do that, fine. But if you don't have it as a policy, and you don't write it down in multiple places, you're not going to ensure that the change is going to stick. You're also not demonstrating your commitment to your marginalized workers as well. But if you don't have it in writing, you cannot empower staff to act when people aren't following. So I have a library where they said, hey, yeah, we audit our displays to make sure they're diverse. We have a 33% marginalized voices requirement, just like Book Riot does. I said, is it in writing? No, Mary just goes and checks every display. What happens if Mary doesn't work there anymore? Oh, then I'll do it. I'm her boss. What happens when you don't work there anymore? Oh, get it in writing. What happens if Mary isn't there one day and someone puts a display up and you're not there and it's really bad? It's all white, cis, heterosexual people. And another staff member wants to say, hey, I think you need to relook at this. It doesn't follow our procedures. They aren't empowered to do that. If it's in a procedure for your department, anyone in the department can question anyone else and have a conversation. Here's the other thing, and we find this at some libraries. There are people who refuse to comply when you tell them to diversify their lists. They make up excuses. Well, those aren't the popular books, or I don't know those books. Whether or not they're racist, they're not complying. If it's a written procedure and they don't follow it and they are told to go fix it and they don't, you can write them up. You can't make people not racist. You can't do it. Don't try, but you can make it against the rules. Another thing I want to talk to you about is the idea of we don't communicate well about what we do. I mentioned this at the beginning, right? People think we buy every single book. Here's a less inflammatory example. When I was at the library I worked there from 2000 to 2015. So I was there during the rise in ebooks, right? Our patrons, even our regular users, were shocked to find out that when we bought a physical book, we did not get every version of it. They assumed we paid one price for the book, the audiobook, the ebook, the large print, all of these things. The fact that they didn't know that is a failing on us. People still don't understand that. They still don't understand how much money we're spending to have multiple copies of every book, right? Let alone understanding why we add the books we add and why we get rid of the books we get rid of. People get upset if something gets weeded, whether it's because they see a lot of them and they fetishize the printed book, or because, they think that we're reading the books that aren't woke. There's all these different reasons. Fact of the matter is we're always reading and we have reasons. And we have them in our collection policies that are very strict and easy to understand. But also, and this is the big point, this is the one that we get all the time, but my community is mostly white, mostly heterosexual. So why do I need to add these books? First of all, There's more people than you know that are marginalized that deserve a right to have their experiences put in there. I have a much longer post about why our collections need to represent the world. And it turns the tables and says, hey, as a white person, if you walked into the library and it represented 99% of it was not you, how would you feel? But besides that, read that, because it's a much more nuanced argument. Let's talk about less inflammatory examples. Two things. The library is the people's university, right? It's a place for people to learn about the world. We live in a global society. We need to help people, no matter where they are and how much they can travel, understand that we're in a global society. You don't believe that we're global and not just local? Then why have we had a global pandemic? I mean, it's so much easier to explain now, right? Because of the pandemic, which stinks, but it's true. But also, I like to use travel books as a lot of examples. And why? Because all libraries have travel books, and all libraries have travel books for areas that are not just within a one-day drive from where they are. All of your libraries have travel books for the entire world. You don't just have travel books for the areas around you. Of course you don't. So why should we only have books about the people we think are the majority of our community? The majority of your travel book section probably isn't even just for the Northeast of the United States. That's a way to explain it with less inflammatory examples. Also, when people talk about cancel culture, which is happening a little bit less, but not never, which is annoying, it's not cancel culture, it's consequences culture. We're finally giving people consequences for their bad behavior. Too long, we allowed people to be poorly behaved and not call them out, right? So when we hear about, well, that's the way it used to be, right? Sexual harassment is a great example. Again, a little bit less inflammatory than racial stuff. But now there's consequences when you do that. And you get sent to jail, or you have consequences and can't do things anymore. You're not canceled, you're having consequences for your actions finally. It was only a couple generations ago that there were separate water fountains for people, that people of color couldn't sit at a counter and eat lunch. That was allowed for a very long time until there were consequences for that. Let's talk about specifically how classics change, right? When we talk about canceling classic authors. Okay, first of all, less inflammatory examples. There was a time when Pride and Prejudice was considered just chick lit of its time, like it's women's stories. And that was a time when women were not seen as equal in society. Flash forward hundreds of years, right? 200 years or so, and women have slowly gained power, right? Women have slowly been equal. They're into academia, for example. And now no one would argue that Pride and Prejudice isn't considered a classic of Western literature. No one would. Why? Because women have finally been able to talk about why it's important and why it matters. Classics change. The books that I read as a kid, that your parents read as kids, they always change. What is considered classic changes. Now I'm going to have some Dr. Seuss real talk to take you one step further, because this is one of the easiest things to understand. It's going to make you really uncomfortable, though. A few years ago, the Dr. Seuss family said, there are 6 books that we no longer want associate with Dr. Seuss's legacy. And by the way, I talk about this more if you don't know about this at that link, and about Pride and Prejudice. 6 books. We are no longer selling them. Well, people went wild. They were like, oh my God, there's no way we can cancel Dr. Seuss. No one's asking you to cancel Dr. Seuss. There were people on the floors of local and federal governments reading from Green Eggs and Ham and saying, the left, the woke the CRT want you to cancel Dr. Seuss and get rid of Green Eggs and Ham. Nobody wants you to get rid of Green Eggs and Ham. Dr. Seuss's family is recognizing from the Code of Ethics and trying to dismantle systemic and individual biases. They are confronting inequity and oppression by saying these 6 books do not accurately represent what Dr. Seuss was about. And we no longer want these associated with his legacy. Who are you to tell Dr. Seuss's legacy or his estate that, no, I need to keep those books for information purposes? No, you don't. You need to get rid of those books right now. If you have those 6 titles, they need to be gone. The only library I talked to that could keep those books is the State Library of New Hampshire. Why? That is Dr. Seuss's birthplace, and they have, for the good and bad, a full record of everything, and they will loan you those books. But Becky, there are holds on them. As Robin says, there are tons of books on hold that she doesn't replace when they come back and they're all beat up or they get lost and there's a hold on them, because they're not worth replacing. No, they're not. They are worth it if there's holds, but she can't get them, right? Less inflammatory example. They're out of print. Oh, well, it fell apart. I can't replace it. It's gone from our collection. That's something we do all the time. So don't tell me there's holds, you have to have it. Number 2, don't tell me, well, I put it off in a reference collection. No. What should you be doing instead? You should be getting rid of them. And when people come in with questions, there's this thing called the internet. And what do? We provide access to information. We will give people information about the controversy, but you are taking a stand against individual biases and systemic racism. You are confronting inequality and oppression, just like the code of ethics. I am reading from that exactly. If you get rid of those books and take a stand, that is acting. So get rid of those books. This is just a real quick reminder that our support staff are more diverse than the vast majority of capital L librarianship, and we need to make sure that they're included in these conversations. But we also don't want to burden marginalized staff and make them lead said trainings, right? And say, well, what do you think as a Black person? The number of times my ladies in book club are like, there was a Jewish person in this book. Is that how all Jewish people feel? And I would say to them, I'm not all Jewish people. I'm one Jewish person, right? Don't do that to people. And it's not a monolith, right? You want to make sure, though, here's an example that you're including staff from both areas. I want to talk about from the bottom of the organizational chart to the top, okay? So the first bullet point is, let's make sure no matter where someone is on the organizational chart, that staff from all levels are involved in EDI decision-making, in your EDI committees. One time I went with an EDI committee at a library to help them, and it was only managers or even middle managers. I said, no, stop. We're not meeting until you diversify this committee. And I don't mean in the color of people's skin or their experiences. I mean, I need people from all levels of the library, not just those who supervise others on this committee. Why? Because the frontline staff, who are normally lower down on the organizational charts, are the ones that deal with conflict. This is why I actually moved my desk by circulation so I could support my mostly minority circulation staff all the time. We want to also acknowledge and empower people from across the organization to show them that their experiences matter and to include them in these conversations. It is a whole library situation. It's a whole library work. And then also to base this in the fact that one of my 10 basic principles of Readers Advisory is that we share the work among each other always. So that will help with that. Then from a management point of view, you want to show your staff that you're serious. So by including them, that's one way. But here's other ways you can do it that aren't necessarily straight up race or diversity based, right? You want to normalize using pronouns. You want to make sure that everybody is encouraged to use pronouns. You can't require it, but it is not until the people in power and or the people who look like their pronouns, it is not until those people are normalizing using pronouns that those who feel they have to share their pronouns. Because I had a library once, they told this person, well, your pronouns, they, them, are different. So you should use them only. No one else needs to. Let's think about that. That has, by the way, since been rectified. And those people, there was learning that happened and that changed at that library. I'm happy to report. So here's a little link about pronouns from NPR for people to help educate them on it. But having a conversation and encouraging everyone on staff to add pronouns to their signatures, to have pronoun buttons they can wear when they're working, it just normalizes it for your community and for your staff. And when they see everyone doing it, it's not a thing that stands out as different. You want to make sure you're also offering continuing education to all levels of staff for all things, to show them there, if you want to go to something, go, right? Pay for them to do something, to learn. You never know. Our marginalized staff have less access to education often. I have a young man who I mentored for many years, who's gay and Latinx, and he didn't go to college, but he was working his way up at the library. We got him, we helped him, the whole library, we helped pay for him tuition reimbursement. He got from Southern New Hampshire University his online college degree. Then he started at library school. But even before he started at library school, when he finished his college degree, he got promoted to head of circulation. And then once he started library school, he got promoted to head of reference because he was homegrown. Yes, he didn't have the qualifications, but he had been there for so long and had done the work, and he just didn't have the time or the money. And it wasn't part of his situation, of his history, of his family to go do these things, to get an education. The very least, you can add things to all your job ads if it requires a library degree or even a college degree or equivalent work experience. That's how you get people. You show them that you are serious about hiring diverse staff in every way. And then offering paid time off for all employees, no matter how few hours they work, on a sliding scale. Okay, let's talk about Readers Advisory specifically, though. I used to talk about why reading diversity was important, and now I'm done with that, right? Robin talked to you about how you can find diverse books. And I don't need to tell you why reading diversity is important anymore. You can read about it if you want, but it just is. The world has everyone. You should be reading books by everyone. I want you to move on to action. That was too passive. Start with yourself, hold yourself accountable, and then everyone else in your sphere. Okay, what can all of you do? All of you can institute a marginalized voices requirement on everything you do. I talked about doing it on displays, right? But if you are a circulation clerk and you're just talking to people about books during the day, make sure you're keeping track of how many of those books are by the dominant culture, right? And make sure you're including books by other people. Make sure you're doing that. Everything you do, you're checking everything you publish, whether it's a discussion on Goodreads or it's a Facebook book chat, or you're doing Ask a Librarian on Twitter, whatever it is, talking to patrons, you are keeping track of you and your organization to make sure that everything is, I like to say at least, start with 33%. Robin and I hate numbers, but I find that I'm doing way more than that. I'm trying to go for 50% because most of the book winning awards these days are by marginalized voices. Okay. Then I get the argument that, well, what about all those lists we already have published? We have a bunch of lists on our website. Do we just have to take them all down because we look at them and we're like, wow, those are really white? No, you don't take them down, but you have to acknowledge. Remember, I talked about apologize, acknowledge, and hold yourself accountable? Apologize. Every list you have online that is way too white and heterosexual, you need to put a comment on that. If they're printed, take them down, right? But if they're on the website, you need to apologize, acknowledge, and hold yourself accountable. So come up with some kind of phrasing that says, this list does not reflect our current merchandising guidelines. Please check back for an updated list soon. That's for libraries who are afraid to call out that the lists are too white, right? You can say, this list does not enhance diversity and inclusion in alignment with the ALA's 9th principle in the Code of Ethics. If you want to really go out there and let people know that you're working on it, it will be updated to conform to our institutional marginalized voices requirement. If you really want to be bold, but at the very least, you got to be clear that this is old and you got to work on it. Not every library can be that bold, but if you can, and you add the Code of Ethics to your policies, you can do it. Also, when you are suggesting books to people, we don't want to focus on the diversity of the characters or the author. We want to focus on the appeal. That doesn't mean we're not mentioning the diversity, right? But when we talk about a book by Colson Whitehead, right? When we talk about Underground Railroad, we are acknowledging the diversity, but also we're talking about the appeal. When we say this is a book about, it's an alternative history of America, where it is the South during the time of the Underground Railroad, but it's different. Because the Underground Railroad is an actual railroad that goes underground. And so we're seeing this story with the same themes and ideas, but from a different perspective. Clearly, this book is about slavery and antebellum South and all of this, but we're not focusing on it. The focus is on this idea that it's historical fiction with an alternative history and fantasy element, right? Because when we do reader's advisory, we're never focusing on the plot, the what, we're focusing on the why. That's one of the basic principles of reader's advisory that I teach. Why someone would like the book, not what happens. So just because a book is by someone who's diverse, who has an identity that isn't part of the norm, the fake norm, I like to call it, or the dominant culture, just because somebody isn't part of that doesn't mean that that's the first thing you mention. You want to help people find books based on appeal. I want you to also, if you have a chance later, go look at this. This is a video recording that says being Indian is not a superpower. It's by Stephen Graham Jones, Native American author, award-winning author of horror fiction, professor at University of Colorado Boulder. And this is a talk he gave when he won a teaching award. Really go watch that. He talks about it from the marginalized perspective. But also I want to point out, it's not a genre. It's not a genre, somebody's race, right? Black books is not a genre. As Robin showed you, there's a Black author for every type of thing, right? For every type of book you could think of. There's a Hispanic author, a Latinx author for every type of thing. There are LGBTQ titles for every type of thing. There are Asian American, Pacific Islanders. It's not just a genre. Within genres, there's room for diversity. So please don't do something like have a bingo card for reader's advisory, trying to diversify your reading and say, read a Black book. No, you should say, right, read a fantasy, and then as a side thing, right, tell people, make sure they're being inclusive if they're reading. Also, I want to talk about discovery, because that's also part of our job, right? A little more passive reader's advisory, but that is part of our job, not just actively speaking to people. So you want to make sure we're using our catalog, not stickers, to improve discovery. We shouldn't be slapping a million stickers on books. Colson Whitehead's a great example, right? So it would be Black author for Underground Railroad and historical fiction, but also science fiction because it's alternative history. And then for zone 1, would we have horror and Black? No, just stop. It's fine if you have sections or all this, but don't start using stickers to identify things. Even LGBTQ books, right? It used to be we put stickers so people could find books because people didn't know how to use our catalogs as well, right, online. But now everyone knows how to use them. And we can add natural language to them. And this whole problem, we were using alternative lifestyles on our LGBTQ books because we wanted people to be able to take them home and not have the big rainbow and have other people see it and could feel safe. What if there's no sticker on the book? But they found it because there was something in the catalog that led them there, right? Or we made displays and we made sure we were diversifying our displays. And so we had fantasy displays and they had books by all sorts of identities on them. You don't want to just have gay book displays, right? Because that's not a genre. So the idea is that we want to use our catalog and add natural language terms to do this. But we also want to make sure, as I already said, we don't want to use titles that just show stereotypes. So when we are highlighting books, and I use myself, Jewish books, they're not all about the Holocaust. I'm sorry, I don't want to read just about the Holocaust. Maybe you all do, but I don't. So there are other books, and maybe people would read other things. It's a great book if you want to understand this. Last year, Dara Horn, who's a great novelist, wrote this book, People Love Dead Jews. It was an essay book and it won some awards. Read that. I think that'll help you understand this. But also, we don't just want to see Black people as slaves, right? We don't just want to see Mexican-American stories about crossing the border. That leads me to my Luis Alberto Urrea story. This is a mini rant about matching people based on appeal, not identity. So read that post, but in that I talk about how two things happen with Luis Alberto Urrea, an award-winning, Pulitzer Prize-winning, National Book Award-winning author. Either people think they're elevating him by giving him white read-alikes, or, and Celeste Ng talks about this a lot too, she's very honest about that, or they're only about being Mexican-American and crossing the border. When if you actually analyze the appeal of Luis Alberto Urrea, he is most like Luis Erdrich, who is a Native American author. So read that to see that. I also have a wonderful post about read-alikes for David Baldacci and how we do what this GIF is doing unintentional racism, where we're putting out one fire, but we create another one. Very quickly, this is about genres that are less elevated. So we look at them with lesser eyes. So thrillers, and how when there are people of color who write thrillers, we put the word literary in front of it to help elevate them, when what that does is alienate thriller readers. So please read about the unintentional racism of that to see what I'm talking about by improving discovery. Because what happens with that is we create faulty resources and then don't allow us to find people of color who are read-alikes for David Baldacci. Here's what you can do. You can pledge to never only have straight white read-alikes, never. Just always find somebody from a different identity to show that the appeal is similar. Depending on how much work you do, Reader's Advisory wise, I do this in book list and library journal. Maybe you're just doing it on your own little reviews. You can do it if you look for books based on appeal, not identity. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes, maybe about 5 minutes, talking about specific situations that are uncomfortable. We do not want to give hateful books a boost, okay? We don't want to display them extra. This is something I do that's a little controversial, but I stand behind it and it's not illegal. Case study. Okay, this is a book, Irreversible Damage, Transgender Creates Seducing Our Daughters. This book is extremely hateful and harmful. When it first came out in 2020 in America, many libraries did not purchase it. I know you're all scrambling to see if you own it now. Many libraries did not purchase it because it got bad reviews and it was called out as hateful. Then the next year it came out in England, and The Economist and the Times of London made it a best book. Fox News, other places picked it up. It became hugely popular with certain factions in America, especially those who are against the trans experience and identity and just existence. Okay, so this library contacted me, a library I trust, a library from the Chicago suburbs in what would be considered a very blue, woke community, and someone asked for the book. And she called me and she said, Becky, what do I do? I said, okay, well, number one, what does your collection development policy said? And like I thought, it said, we make professional decisions based on reviews, but if there's a request from a library card member, a library card holder in our community or someone in our community, and the book has positive reviews from reputable sources, we have to buy it. In this case, I said, not buying this book is censorship, unfortunately, because it was in The Economist, which, in the Times of London, which are major respected resources. I mean, I have less respect for them now. And it was asked by somebody. But here's the thing. Nowhere in anyone's collection development policy does it say every single new book you buy must go on the new shelf. Nowhere. It says that nowhere. It doesn't. You get a new copy of Dracula, you don't put it out on the shelf. You're just replacing the old one, right? Because it got grubby. You don't have to put this book on the new shelf. You shouldn't have this book ever on displays or lists. Let's remember Robin's talk. This book should be buy to die. Remember she talked about buy to try? This one's a buy to die. It's what we usually do with books by marginalized people, right? We are going to confront inequity and oppression, and we're going to recognize and dismantle systemic and individual biases. An individual bias that is not okay for the library. We are advancing racial and social justice in our libraries, according to the 9th principle. It is not censorship to not display this book. You can have it in your catalog. You can give it out on holds to people who want it. But now, how do we keep track of all these problematic titles? There are many. I say every library should create a spreadsheet of titles of concern. Again, it follows the ALA Code of Ethics. We are keeping track of titles that do not do the things that 9th principle wants us to do. Anyone on staff can submit titles to that list. But the people in charge of collection development are the ones that get to say what happens with book on those lists. And Orson Scott Card should be on that list. And J.K. Rowling should be on that list. And this book should be on that list. And the 2 books on the next slide should be on that list. And all the books that Tucker Carlson talks about that you have to buy go on that list. You don't get rid of them. You don't not buy them. But if they're on that list, they can't be displayed, including the new bookshelf. They can't be put on any lists. You now have it in writing. You can check to make sure. There's a place for people to go if they're not sure. There's people who can hold everyone accountable. You are acknowledging and apologizing that these problematic books exist, but that we must purchase them if they are requested by our community. It is not censorship. We are acknowledging and holding ourselves accountable. These books can be put in a more aggressive weeding schedule. My library that I am on the board for, our collection development policy has been featured in Rebecca Vinook's weeding guide twice, the LaGrange Public Library. And it's a small library, 16,000 people in our community. We have a very detailed collection development policy, which every area of the library has a different weeding schedule. So for example, the travel books, we're back to our friends, the travel books. The travel books are weeded aggressively. If a new book for Illinois comes out, we get rid of every old book. We're not keeping the old ones. We're aggressively turning them over. We're aggressively turning over our fiction. If it doesn't circulate in 3 years, we're a popularly circulating library. Under very slim circumstances, do we keep anything, even if it's a classic, if it hasn't circulated in 3 years? We're part of a consortium. Our people don't want to read it. We're getting rid of it. You can make aggressive reading for the titles in this category. It's still in your catalog, available for discovery. You're just not giving it a boost. Now, there are many problematic titles. I understand this. They don't all need to go immediately. I'm not saying these books need to go. You're not going to weed Little House on the Prairie and American Dirt, but we have to acknowledge and hold ourselves accountable that they're there, right? What we do is provide information. So I have an example of how I handled American Dirt with the controversy, which I felt like Oprah did a very good job, because instead of rescinding the book when she got the complaints about it, she said, no, we're going to use this as a chance to educate people on why this book is problematic with the author. I applaud her for doing that. I have a post about how to handle American Dirt from that standpoint of acknowledging and helping people learn and grow while still having it in your collection, because you can't not have it. It's circulating. Same with Little House on the Prairie. I found when I went to look, Nashville Public Library does something very similar. These are different ages, but similar approaches. Please take some time to look at those when you have time. And that might be an area where you have some more questions about doing that later when we come back. But go read it before you finish sending your questions in and ask me questions. Okay, we're getting toward the end. So I want to hit this right now. At times, you're going to have to address outright bigotry directly. Libraries are for everyone is fine. That's not active though. That's passive. That leaves space for people who are upholding systemic repression, right? Who don't want to advance racial and social justice. This is where we get in trouble by saying libraries are for everyone. So the Nazis are allowed to have a program. The anti-trans people are allowed to have a program. No, they're not. Not with that code of ethics, 9th principle. This is more direct. This is the Phoenix Rising MLS team. When they announced they had a Pride Night, someone asked, when is Straight Pride Night? And they said, we'll let you know when we have A-hole night and we can honor you at halftime. Now that's too direct, right? But it's different than this. Our answer is somewhere in the middle. Being direct is your best way to go. You can use your behavior policy to be direct. You can put in your behavior policy some of the wording from this ALA Code of Ethics 9th principle, so that when people are racist or are trying to ask you to be inequitable or are doing things that are not okay, like saying out loud things like, I don't want any Black or gay books. Why are you giving me those? We can talk about how you handle that though, without causing a stir later if you'd like. But here's the way you can do it. Say, we are a library that recognizes that the ALA Code of Ethics, which says that there are individual biases and inequity and oppression in our country. So we have books by everyone. I am matching a book for you based on the appeal of the book, not on the person's identity. And then I give them 3 books and I always give them one of exactly what they didn't want. And let me tell you, when you get people and you address them directly and you say things like, well, did you read The Vanishing Half? Like, of course I did. I loved it. And you're like, okay, well, not only is it about racial passing, but this is especially a good one when I ask people when they don't want any gay or trans books. And I say, really? There's a major secondary storyline, like the second biggest storyline in the book involves a very sweet romance between a woman and a trans man. And it's like, it's the next generation. It's the story that ends the story. It's important. And you liked that book. So don't tell me you don't read those. When you do this work, you'll also get people asking, where are all your regular books? Why are your displays so diverse? These are questions that come in your area. So what do we want to do? We want to use our behavior policy. We want to add this also to our program policy, right? These code of ethics that allow us to not allow people to be outright racist. And we can ask them to leave if they don't follow the behavior policy. You have to do this and get it in writing. You can also provide talking points for staff as issues arrive. So I have a post about how we normalize sharing uncomfortable situations and interactions at my library. It is not easy, but if you have open conversations, you can do it. And you want to also encourage team problem solving. So when things come up, when somebody is racist or somebody does something, no matter who the staff are, there needs to be a way to report it, because not everybody will be at the same place and feeling empowered to confront racist behavior, especially if this person is marginalized themselves. So we want to make sure there's a way to report it, where we can talk about it as a library, where we can encourage talking points for answering those that everyone has at their desk, so that there are ways that everyone can react when they see something uncomfortable happening. And as we're finishing up, I just have a couple last slides. I want to make sure this action step is more of a, don't forget you have to learn about other equity issues, right? So there is systemic oppression, but service to readers is our brand. It's something we all do. It's a great way to get the ball rolling. It's a great way that each of us can work and inspire the rest of our organization to do more. There are so many more places where we need to make sure EDI is at the front. My goal is not equity. My goal is inclusion. My goal is removing all the barriers, right? Fines are an example of barriers. If your library still has fines, please stop, and please send me an email, which my email's at the end, if you need help getting rid of fines at your library, because I've done it with my library and other libraries. The other thing is we want to stay at the top of all equity, diversity, inclusion issues. And ways you can do that is to do something like we do at Rails, which is my system. We have an EDI pulse page. We have a pulse page on materials challenges. We have a pulse page on COVID. These are big time issues, right? Issues that libraries are thinking about, involved in, and very much present at the moment, with links and resources, and then continuing education that we're providing and listservs. You can use our page to stay up to date. You can't watch our CE unless you log in, but you can use this to stay up to date on issues. You can join our mailing list. But I would suggest you create your own pulse page for these issues to help each other stay abreast of issues. Not only is this a great way to pass on information to larger groups of people and help each other, but get a wider breadth of things, whether it's just who has a presenter on this topic, or here are news articles I think people should look at. But it's also a great way for those who are lower on the organizational chart to be involved, because some of them say at their libraries, they can't really speak up, right? But here's the thing. They can if they said, hey, and they forward it to a boss. I saw this on a listserv, or I saw this somewhere else. Please remember, this is my action step. Some of you are at a different place than others. Some of you are raring to go and you're upset at how long it's taking. And others, you are still coming to terms with your discomfort with the things I've been saying. I know there's going to be questions about the spreadsheet of titles of concern. Everybody hates it. But when you really confront it, it's a great thing. It's a marathon we're in. It's 400 years of a wall of systemic oppression that's been built. I am helping you take down but a few little rocks, right? You have to do the work. It's dirty. It's physically intensive. You're going to feel uncomfortable. Being well-meaning, though, is not enough. Start doing these things and hold yourself and others accountable. That's that same link of that lady at the school board meeting. And keep listening to learn. You want to set an example. Personal responsibility with you first. And I like to end with this quote by Arthur Chan: for those who are unwilling to be pulled along. Diversity is a fact. Our world is diverse. Equity, making everybody above the wall the same, to see over the wall, is a choice. But the action I'm talking about is inclusion. It's getting rid of that wall from the last slide. And the outcome is belonging. And nobody would argue that the library isn't about making people feel like they belong. And that is the end of my talk. I am very glad that I have more time to talk with you all. Please send in your questions, and they're anonymous, and we're going to tackle them in groups. And we're also going to take questions live, but we'd like to start with some of your questions. Robin and I understand that some of your questions you might not be comfortable even doing that way. Please send in questions to me at my email, and do that and send them to my email, which is there on the screen. Send them to me and just say Metro New York Live Q&A, and Robin and I will consider them. We will not give anyone's name. We will not betray your trust, but we will be here to answer your questions. So please ask them. Thank you very much for your time. Bye, everyone.